Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Courtney Mercer, the Executive Director of Downtown New Jersey. Welcome to our somewhat regular, mostly monthly Downtown Management Forum series. Today, we're excited to have representatives from the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT talking about how to turn brownfields into downtown assets. Each of our folks will introduce themselves as we go along, so I won't do that right now. But I want to thank all of our speakers for being with us today. For those of you who don't know, Downtown New Jersey is a nonprofit education and advocacy organization dedicated to revitalizing our downtowns. We provide technical assistance. We do topical newsletters, these roundtables, which hopefully next year we'll start doing them in person quarterly again. But then I think we'll keep these virtual ones in the in-between months. We also do advocacy, and we do awards, a conference. We like to spotlight our members in the newsletter, etc. Again, we're a member-supported nonprofit, so if you're not a member and interested in joining, feel free to reach out and find out a little bit more about that. As I said, we've been hosting these forums for a while now, virtually, pretty much since the week after or 2 weeks after the shutdown began. All of the videos, there's PowerPoints, etc., for all our past forums are up on our website. And we have another forum. We will likely have an October forum. I just haven't nailed it down yet. But in November, we'll also be having a forum at the League of Municipalities. So that one will be live, and you have to be a attendee at the League of Municipalities to participate, and its small downtowns can do economic development too. And a reminder, because we are a member-supported organization, these forums we're offering these forums for free, but we are asking non-members to please make a nominal donation to support our work in making these happen. So if you're not a member, either become one, or if not, we'd appreciate you making a small donation at bit.ly/forum-donation. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Colette, who I think will introduce her crew and get started.
Okay, thank you very much, Courtney. Colette Santasiri, I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center, excuse me, at NJIT. I am going to shut my camera off so you're not distracted by the talking head here, and we'll continue on. I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks very much to Courtney for inviting us. Joining me today are Sean Broom, the Director of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT, and Mary Kay Morelli, Vice President of GZA, which is a consulting firm and an affiliate member of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT. We're going to take a few minutes and give you a formal presentation on brownfields, and then we're going to leave lots of time for a discussion and Q&A. So Courtney, next slide, please. Right, thank you. So I'm going to start off with two basic definitions of brownfields so we all understand what they are. The first is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as EPA, defines a brownfield as a property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Similarly, New Jersey state law defines a brownfield as any former or current commercial or industrial site that is currently vacant or underutilized, and on which there has been or there is suspected to have been a discharge of a contaminant. Next slide. So brownfield sites include old mills and factories, junkyards and rail yards, the byproducts of New Jersey's industrial legacy. Additionally, the closed gas stations and auto repair shops, the former dry cleaners, and some other vacant commercial properties are also considered brownfields. So it's important to point out that not all contaminated sites are brownfields, and not all brownfields are contaminated. So for instance, an active gas station that experiences a spill or a leaking underground storage tank is contaminated, but not a brownfield because it is still a viable business. A property containing a closed auto repair facility would be considered a brownfield because it's a former commercial site that is currently vacant, and because of its past use, there may be contamination, but it's not necessarily contaminated. But you would have to look into that a little more carefully to see if there's contamination. We're going to talk about that a little later. Next slide. So the presence of brownfield sites presents many negative impacts to downtowns, but the cleanup and redevelopment of brownfield sites can contribute to creating vibrant downtowns. The process of cleaning up and redeveloping contaminated properties can be a really daunting task. There are many, many different steps in the process, and we're just going to mention a few of them within the short time frame that we have in this presentation. But again, we can go into more detail in our discussion. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at this brownfields redevelopment process, the first phase of work should be the planning phase. It's widely recognized that successful brownfield redevelopment projects are based on a foundation of sound planning practices. There's a strong connection between effective early on and continued planning with redevelopment success. So there's a number of different activities that you should be initiating in the planning phase that will play important roles throughout the redevelopment process. We're only going to touch on a few of them again in this formal discussion, formal presentation, but we can get into more detail later. Next slide. So brownfields redevelopment is a team sport, and one of the first activities that should be initiated in the planning phase that will play a really important role throughout the redevelopment process is the identification of stakeholders and development of supportive partnerships. So the redevelopment of brownfields generally requires more stakeholder participation than the typical real estate transaction due to a number of possible factors, including the complex history of the site, community concerns about public health and safety, difficulty getting funding and financing, and competing visions for the site's redevelopment, to name a few. In addition, the cost of redeveloping a contaminated property often extends beyond local resources, and as such necessitates partnerships. Next slide. So partners bring resources and specialized knowledge to your brownfields redevelopment team. They foster communication and collaboration, and they build bridges between relevant stakeholders. There are several typical partners involved in brownfields redevelopment. I've listed some of them. For instance, agencies of the federal government, such as the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. They provide both funding assistance and expertise. State environmental and economic development agencies such as the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and New Jersey Economic Development Authority also bring important resources to brownfields redevelopment. Another typical partner is real estate professionals. They can help communities better understand the realities of the real estate market and can suggest various incentives that would help make local brownfields redevelopment projects economically viable. The public-private partnership between a local government and a real estate developer is an effective collaboration for brownfields redevelopment, especially in areas where the market is weak. Another typical partner could be a university or college. Professors, researchers, graduate students may provide insight and expertise on brownfields related topics. Some universities and colleges host design studios in which students work on real-world redevelopment projects. An important resource housed at the New Jersey Institute of Technology is the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT, which provides free technical assistance to the public and nonprofit sectors. And you'll hear more about our center in a little while and how we can assist you. But we also recommend, in addition to these typical partners, that you go beyond the usual suspects. There are other groups and organizations that can add value to your brownfields redevelopment team. They can offer unique and important resources to your efforts. For instance, local artists and cultural institutions can be great partners in bringing attention to brownfield sites, suggesting creative ways to engage the community in envisioning the property's reuse, and creatively marketing the sites. So the takeaway here is creating partnerships and collaborations help with a number of different things. It helps with community engagement. It helps you access funding. It increases your ability to tackle complex brownfield issues and creates avenues and future partnerships for redevelopment. Next slide. Another major planning task is assessing where you're at. So what do I mean by that? We find that many communities have a tendency to become what we call site-centric. That is, focusing only on the brownfield property itself and on the contamination challenges. What we encourage you to do is take a step back, to first look at how that piece of property fits within the context of the larger community, because that's going to help you tell your story about the property. So assess what plans are out there and how they relate to your brownfield site. So for instance, look at your municipal master plan. What does the master plan say about the area of town in which your site is located? Are there any redevelopment plans for the area in which your site lies? Is your site within a vulnerable area, such as one that frequently floods? Look at the zoning for your site. What uses are permitted? Placing your brownfield site within the context of the larger community helps to inform the ultimate redevelopment vision for the site. It's also important to find out what actions have already been taken, such as, has a brownfields inventory already been prepared for your municipality showing where all the brownfield sites are? If that doesn't exist, we encourage municipalities to compile one. It's really valuable information as you, again, proceed through this process. Other things you should look at is, have there been investments in the area surrounding the site, such as infrastructure improvements, roadway, rail, utilities, things like that. That information will really help you market your site later on. Then we suggest you focus on your particular brownfield site. Find out all you can about that site. Who owns it? Is it publicly held or privately held? What are the current uses and conditions of the site itself? Has there already been an assessment conducted to determine if contamination exists? That's really valuable information. Is there already developer interest in the site? All of this information, again, in the planning phase, helps inform what you're going to do and how you're going to proceed throughout the redevelopment process. Next slide, please. So why is it important to plan? It is about getting your ducks in a row and positioning for greater success with your brownfield redevelopment process. So taking the time to go through all of the planning steps helps you in many different ways. It helps you garner community participation and support for the ultimate redevelopment project. Planning will help you write a stronger grant application when you're seeking funding, because it helps funders see that this is a real project, not just an idea, not just a concept, and that real project has emanated from a planning process. It will strengthen the marketability of the site. It will show the town's commitment to potential developers and also help you attract the type of developers that you want, those interested in building projects desired by the community. And taking the time to plan will also provide continuity for the ultimate redevelopment of the site. Remember that elected officials come and go, but a solid vision and a solid plan can endure those changes. Next slide, please. Another fundamental element of the planning process is determining where you can get the funding to do all of this work. I'm going to turn the program over to Sean, who will discuss funding for brownfields redevelopment. Sean?
Okay, thank you, Colette. And good morning, everyone. As Colette stated, I'm going to discuss funding for brownfields redevelopment. So planning for, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping your brownfield sites comes with a cost. And most county and municipal governments, as well as nonprofits, do not have the funds to cover all of those costs. So it's really important to know where to find funding, how to secure it, and how to apply it to your project. So brownfields projects are funded by multiple sources that may include grants, loans, and tax incentives, just to name a few. The key to successfully finding a brownfields project is the ability to bundle those multiple sources, which is commonly referred to as the funding stack. And creating this funding stack goes beyond simply identifying funding sources. It requires project vision as well as solid planning to assure those funding resources are brought to bear at the appropriate place and time. And what I mean by that is that brownfield projects are somewhat linear in nature. You basically develop a vision or a goal, and then you lay out the tasks you need to achieve that vision or goal. So in simple terms, you plan, you assess, you remediate, then you redevelop your brownfield. The various brownfield funding sources that you've identified most likely will be applicable to only a certain phase or task along the way, only applicable to a certain element of your project, and are available at certain times. So having a solid redevelopment plan is critical to applying funding resources. So keep in mind that if you have a developer on board, much of the funding associated with the redevelopment phase will be their responsibility. So you won't have to be concerned with identifying those sources. So that basically lightens the lift a little bit. Next slide, please. So what I've listed here are some of the more common brownfield funding sources. It's by no means intended to be a comprehensive list. The first one I want to talk about includes EPA's MARC Brownfields Grants. MARC stands for Multi-Purpose Assessment Revolving Loan Fund, or RLF, and cleanup. These grants, as you might have guessed, cover assessment and cleanup activities. One grant, the multi-purpose grant, covers both. And only recently, the assessment and multi-purpose grants cover planning activities such as brownfield inventories, community engagement, market studies, which is great because most communities don't have the resources to do brownfields planning. And that was as a result of EPA recognizing how critical good planning for these projects is. So entities that are eligible for these grants include local, county, state, and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits. The funding amounts range depending on the grant type from $200,000 up to $2 million. But the 2 million is a little bit misleading. That's really that's an eligibility for either state or tribal governments. For municipalities, the cap is at 1 million, depending on the grant. And EPA solicits these grants annually, usually in the fall. They select the winners. In fact, they're going to release the guidelines for the next solicitation next week sometime. They select the winners the following spring, and then the applicant has access to the funds the following fall. There's a bunch of work that has to be done before you get to that point. So basically, it takes 1 year from application to access to the funding. So as I mentioned earlier, you can see why planning and timing are extremely important to the redevelopment process. I should also note that the RLFs and multi-purpose grants alternate years. So multi-purpose grants are solicited on odd fiscal years, and the revolving loan funds on even fiscal years. Another funding source includes NJDEP's Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund, or more commonly known as HDSRF. This program is kind of a joint program between NJDEP and the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. HDSRF grants are loans, and they're available to, they can be either grants or loans, and they're available to public entities, private entities, and nonprofit organizations. The program is a rolling application process. The applications are basically prioritized based on whether you're in an urban municipality. So, if you're in a BDA or an urban planning area or something of that nature, you would be eligible. Assessment costs are 100% covered in this program. Redevelopment or remediation costs are shared. The cost share is tied to the ultimate end use of the project. So it's incrementally goes up depending on what that end use is going to be. HDSRF only covers costs directly associated with assessment and remediation, so they don't have the flexibility of the EPA Brownfields grants to do planning work. But unlike the EPA grants, they are available to the private sector. The HDSRF, basically the caps on these funds are up to $1 million in loans, to businesses and individuals per calendar year, and up to $2 million in grants and loans to municipalities. The next source is New Jersey Economic Development Authority's tax credit and revolving loan fund programs. I don't have much on these. These are anticipated to be rolled out later on this year or early next year. Again, I don't have a lot of detail or any detail really at this point, other than they will be applicable to brownfields. So we'll just have to wait and see what the funding amounts and eligibility requirements will be for those programs. So keep an eye on those, keep an eye on the horizon for those that come out. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that there are other funding sources available, but they can be somewhat of a moving target. And what I mean by that is that their availability from year to year and what project elements they can specifically be applied to can vary. So, USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, United States Department of Transportation, United States Economic Development Authority, all have funding programs that can be applied to certain elements of a brownfields project, but you have to know what those project elements are going to be so that you can determine the eligibility of those funds for that task. So, for example, if you have a brownfield that you're redeveloping, and one of the elements is the preservation of a pedestrian bridge that's located on the site, USDOT may have a funding source that's available through its grant programs that could be either, applied to either the rehab of the structure or remediation work for the area that the bridge lies within. So you have to know, again, what you're going to ultimately have and what those project elements are. So the big takeaway here is that, in order to identify, your funding sources, to secure them and be able to apply them to your funding stack, again, you have to have good planning to tie it all together. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Colette.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So let's go into another phase of the redevelopment process. And you heard Sean use the words assessment and remediation several times. So we're going to talk about what that is. The redevelopment of brownfield site is pretty much like any other real estate development, but with a twist. And that twist deals with the potential for contamination of soil, water, and indoor air, as well as hazardous building materials. So prior to redevelopment, the property must go through a process to determine if contamination exists, and if so, the appropriate way to deal with that contamination. These necessary environmental investigations, as well as the remediation of contaminants, add time and expenses to the typical real estate development process, but they are essential to safeguarding public health. I'm going to turn the program over to Mary Kay Morelli. Again, she's with GZA. She's also a licensed site remediation professional, and she's going to give you a quick overview of the New Jersey regulatory process. And again, during the Q&A and discussion, feel free to ask questions so that we can talk in more detail about each of these steps. So if we'll go to the next slide, Mary Kay, you're up.
Sure. Thank you, Colette. Again, as Colette said, I'm Mary Kay Morelli from GZA. I'm a New Jersey licensed site remediation professional, or LSRP, and I have successfully navigated this regulatory process hundreds of times. Today, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the NJDEP regulatory process for brownfield sites. The first step is hiring someone like myself, an LSRP. The LSRP is responsible to see that the site is suitable for redevelopment, with public health and safety as our top priority throughout the entire process. The LSRP will issue the final remediation document needed to complete this regulatory process. This document is your response action outcome, or commonly known as your RAO letter. Receiving your site's RAO is your ultimate redevelopment goal. And keep in mind, with careful planning, redevelopment activities can occur throughout this entire process I'm going to walk you through. As you can see on the slide, after you hire an LSRP, in New Jersey, the first step in the environmental investigation of a brownfield property is a preliminary assessment. The preliminary assessment satisfies the due diligence. It answers the question, do any areas of concern, AOCs, exist? That is there potential contamination on the property? The preliminary assessment report will contain conclusions for each area of concern identified. Either the AOC is potentially contaminated and therefore additional investigation is required, or the AOC is not suspected to be contaminated and will not require further investigation. If the preliminary assessment report concludes that there are no areas of concern that require further investigation, the LSRP issues the REO and you're done and your site is ready for redevelopment. However, if the preliminary assessment report concludes that there is potential contamination based on past use or current property conditions, the next step in New Jersey's regulatory process would be conduct a site investigation, or SI. The SI answers the question, is there actual contamination on the property? During the site investigation, the LSRP evaluates all of the AOCs that were identified in the preliminary assessment. These could include underground storage tanks, hazardous waste storage areas, manufacturing areas, floor drains, roof drains, you name it. The site investigation is where samples are first collected from soil, groundwater, and even soil vapor if necessary. The results are evaluated and compared to NJDEP's soil, groundwater, and vapor standards by the LSRP. If the sampling results are below regulatory concern, the LSRP issues the REO and you can proceed with your redevelopment of the site. But if contamination is found above the NJDEP standards, the next phase would be the remedial investigation, or RI. Now you can see we've made it all the way around to the third line on this graphic, the remedial investigation. This is when the LSRP determines the horizontal and vertical extent of soil and or groundwater contamination that may have been found during the site investigation. Once all of the contamination has been fully delineated, the LSRP prepares a remedial action work plan. This plan presents how the LSRP plans to remediate the identified contamination. For example, if soil contamination was found during the remedial investigation, the LSRP may include soil excavation as part of the remedial action work plan. Once the LSRP evaluates how to deal with the identified contamination, the regulatory process moves on to the remedial action phase, where the LSRP implements their remedial action work plan. This is where all the action takes place on your site. Remediation for soil could include excavating contaminated soil and disposing the soil off-site, or placing a deed restriction on the area with contaminated soil, depending on the site's proposed usage. Groundwater remediation might entail active treatment or biochemical injections, or even monitored natural attenuation, which means the groundwater contamination is degrading naturally and is monitored over time by the LSRP. All these things occur during the remedial action phase of the process. The remedial action phase is actually considered complete when soil and or groundwater have been remediated to below the NJDEP standards, or your final remedy includes leaving impacted material on site and managing that material with an NJDEP approved remedial action permit. At this point, the LSRP can issue the response action outcome letter, and the site has successfully navigated this entire process. I realize this is a lot of information in one slide, but I can assure you the regulatory process can be navigated seamlessly by LSRPs like myself, and these sites can be put back into best use. Thanks, Colette.
All right, thank you, Mary Kay. Next slide. All right, so before we open the program up to questions and discussions, I want to make mention of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center at NJIT. This is the first of its kind and only center that solely focuses on and serves New Jersey communities. It is a free resource to the state's county and local governments and nonprofits. We at the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center view brownfield sites as opportunities, and there are opportunities to transform former industrial and commercial sites into community assets. But we recognize that many local governments and nonprofits do not have the in-house knowledge or resources, including funding, to tackle the challenges posed by brownfield sites. So that's why we created this center, to provide guidance, to provide technical assistance, and to help you along your redevelopment process. The center's team of professionals includes planners, engineers, environmental scientists, and social scientists who have experience helping hundreds of communities from across the country overcome their brownfield challenges. Next slide. So here's how we can help you. And remember that if you are a public entity or a nonprofit, our assistance to you is free. We have a resource center that includes a website containing many tools and valuable information. Actually, anybody can access this website, so you don't have to be a public entity or nonprofit. It's available to anybody. And we also post valuable information on our social media platforms, so please follow us. Next slide. A key feature of the New Jersey Brownfields Assistance Center is our Brownfields Help Desk. So you can reach us by phone or by email, and that's all the information there. Here's where our personal Brownfields assistance begins. And again, we tailor this assistance to your particular needs. In this discussion that follows, we can give you lots of examples of the type of assistance that we have provided other communities and that we can provide you. But please do not hesitate to contact us to discuss your brownfield challenges and ways in which we can help you. Let's go to the next slide. One last item I wanted to mention before we open this up. On September 28th, the Brownfields Assistance Center will be conducting a Brownfields Learning Lab for communities contained within the Highlands region of New Jersey. The event is being hosted by the New Jersey Highlands Water Protection and Planning Council. Again, it is a free event. It is virtual. It's a 2-hour virtual event. We'll go into a lot more details about the Brownfields redevelopment process and different aspects of that process, go into greater detail than we did in the past 20 minutes or so. So if you're interested in attending, you really don't have to be from the Highlands region of New Jersey. Anybody can attend. So if you're interested, please register in advance for this event. You're more than welcome to attend, and we hope to see you there. I am going to turn back the program to Courtney. I know we've given you a lot of information in a very short time, so please feel free to ask questions. And if for some reason we don't have a lot of information for you to answer your question during this event, we will follow up with you. Please provide us with any contact information, or you can contact us directly and we'll follow up with you. So, Courtney.
Great. Thank you so much, Colette. And I just want to put forward, because I think I already relayed to you the one question that came through about gas stations. And then I also got a direct message in the chat also about gas stations with a little asterisk that says it's now part of the Sustainable Jersey Actions for 2021. So I suspect a lot of people are interested in gas station mitigation. Any kind of more detailed information, thoughts, ideas for folks on that?
Well, I know Mary Kay is going to have a lot to say because she's been very involved with gas stations, but let me just say this. Part of our mission as the Brownfields Assistance Center is to provide these educational forums, like today, and like what I mentioned, the Brownfields Learning Lab we're going to be doing at the Highlands region. We are planning to have a webinar on gas stations, hopefully this fall or early winter. So be on the lookout for that. But let me turn it over to Mary Kay if you want to start that conversation, and then Sean and I will jump in if we have anything to add.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, gas stations are out there. They're everywhere in every town in New Jersey. So they present a great thing. And yes, they are considered a brownfield. So basically, again, kind of like my slides showed, as far as the regulatory process and navigating if there's contamination, the first step is to get an LSRP involved to look into the site. Again, that first step is a preliminary assessment where they'd go out, they do a site inspection, and they'd identify maybe there's floor drains from old auto body place, oil water separators, of course, underground storage tanks, and kind of identify all those areas. And from that spot, then they would go out and take samples and basically compare that to the standards to see if you had any contamination present. So that's basically your starting point. Again, getting an LSRP involved, looking at the site history, seeing what's out there currently, and then moving forward through that entire process.
So, one of the things that I wanted to mention, and Sean, you can jump in here, is when you have an EPA assessment grant, you can get an EPA assessment grant to assess contamination on a property that you may not own. So if a municipality has a gas station in town, they can apply for funding from EPA to assess the contamination on that site. They do not have to own the site. However, they do need to have permission from the property owner to do that assessment. A lot of property owners don't have the funds to actually, find out what the contamination is and then clean up the contamination. So this is a really good private-public partnership idea where the municipality can try to get funding from EPA to conduct the assessment on the gas station. Now we'll know what the contamination is, if there is contamination. And that kind of knowledge helps to market the site as well for other developers, because now they know what the contamination is, and that minimizes their risks, or at least makes them understand what they're up against. Or if the municipality is looking to acquire the property, the municipality will have a good idea of what the cleanup requirements are going to be, because now they know what the contamination is. I don't know if Sean, if you want to jump in any more about that funding.
Sure. I mean, the one thing I would just add to that is that, as Colette mentioned, you have to have permission to go on the site, or what's commonly referred to as site access. So, it's very important from the beginning to have that communication with the property owner. If you need to get New Jersey DEP involved, it's a good thing, because the thing is, most property owners are going to be afraid that they're going to get in trouble, they're going to be fined. So you want them to sit down at the table with you as well as NJDEP and be assured that, look, we're not here to smack you with a fine. We're here to come up with a solution that's going to benefit everyone, including yourself. So that's an important part of this, or you're not going to get site access. And if you can't have no access, no assessment. So it's something to keep in mind.
How do you get over, I was wondering, as Colette was saying it, that hurdle, because I could very well see folks, is there some type of MOU? Is there some, because if you know it's contaminated, can you force the assessment at some point? And, or, how do you convince them that they're not going to have to pay for it? And who is going to pay for it if they're not going to pay for it? It's a slippery slope, I think, that's hard to rectify. How have you dealt with that in the past?
Yeah, and a lot of that issue is causing a lot of sites to remain vacant or underutilized, because the property owners are very nervous about, what the liability is if their sites are contaminated. So a lot of these sites are mothballed. They just sit there for years and years. So, it goes back into the planning phase. If you're a municipality or if you're a nonprofit and you're really interested in this property, reaching out to the property owner and say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about what we can be doing together to get this site cleaned up and redeveloped. If a municipality is going to acquire this site, they can apply for funding for the cleanup as well after they acquire the site, not while it's still privately held. So there's different ways to work around this issue. But yeah, as Sean said, going to the property owner and kind of reassuring them that we're having this conversation. We all want to come up with a strategy on how to move forward. We want to work together. There's ways for us to work together. Hopefully helps the property owner feel a little more comfortable about moving forward.
And more along that line, because I know the question that came in ahead of time was not just gas stations, but turning gas stations into parks. And so how competitive are these funds, one, for the assessment in the first place, and then two, I'm sure there have been kind of partnership funding between, the assessment and the cleanup, and then Green Acres comes in for the park development. Can you talk about any projects like that, or how any of that would work, and the competitiveness of the funds?
You want to take that, Sean?
Sure. Well, EPA, I can tell you that the EPA MARC grant program is extremely competitive. I don't have the numbers in front of me about how many apply and who gets awarded, but that's where, again, it's to assure that you're going to have a good shot at receiving that funding. That's where having the good planning, so, that you can draw upon to put together a good and competitive and successful application with EPA. As far as the state funding, those actually HDSRF monies are actually utilized more in New Jersey than EPA MARC grant funding. That process, like I said, is rolling, is an ongoing rolling kind of solicitation for applications. And again, I think, you need to make sure that you're fitting the parameters of what that is. So you have to be in an urban area for those funds.
What's the definition of urban?
Well, that would be like a BDA, any designated area
Okay.
that the states come up with. So, I mean, I'm, which is probably a lot of New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you should be okay. But there is a lot of, HDSRF has a significant amount of funding available in that program. It's a well-funded program. But like I said, you have to look at this bigger picture of, and that speaks back to kind of getting site access for some of these projects, where if you can show where these funding sources are going to be plugged in throughout the life and the course of the project, that may help you reassure a property owner that, okay, there's going to be funding, they're willing to take this project, this site, clean it up, and so on. But yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, they're competitive programs. There's a lot of, especially nationwide with EPA.
And now
It doesn't
that's
mean it's-
where you all come in to help people kind of think
Yes.
through some of these, the grant applications
Absolutely.
and their likelihood and what will make them more likely to get the funds.
We have a lot of experience in reviewing, critiquing grant applications. So what we won't write the application for you or for whoever the applicant is. However, we will do an in-depth critique of it. So we've looked at, we've been doing this since 2008 with EPA, as far as, grant reviews. So we know what they're looking for. And we can really work with the applicant to come up with a competitive, and every year, they come out with guidelines. There's different focus areas. Are you in a flood zone? Are you in an opportunity zone that they kind of put emphasis on, but every year that kind of can change. So we can help kind of focus your project, maybe your target area to make that application more higher rate of success with it. So
Let me interject here with two comments. One, the new EDA funding and financing programs, that's going to add a lot of money to the state of New Jersey, to communities that want to redevelop their brownfield sites. That can significantly help communities in New Jersey. So please, keep an eye out on that for that. The other thing I wanted to say, and Sean, maybe we can go into more detail about this. A lot of times we see communities who are going to apply for brownfields funding start their application about a month before it's due. That's too late. There's a lot of work you can be doing well in advance of the funding opportunity being publicly, advertised. There's a lot you can do, and this goes back to the emphasis that we gave in this presentation about planning activities. So Sean, you want to mention some of the things that municipalities can be doing long before they actually start putting together their application?
absolutely. So, we do webinars twice a year for every solicitation cycle. And one of those webinars is back in early spring, where we say what you can be doing now to apply for an EPA grant. So things that you can be doing early on include a preliminary inventory if you're looking at a focus area and not just one site. The grant applications require you to have a lot of supporting data to quantify basically your compelling story that grant has to comprise. So you can start collecting data. You want to, there's traditional health data sources out there, but it takes time to compile that data. There may be an area where you don't have that available data through the traditional sources. So you might need to think outside of the box. You might want to look at any data you might be able to acquire from a hospital or a, I always forget the name of these, the quick, like the little
MetaMerge,
Medimerge.
urgent care.
Urgent care centers. I always forget
The
the name.
generic term, I think. Yeah.
So, you can collect data from there. You can, one of the critical thing that you want to start early is your community engagement. A lot of people, you can't, you basically have 6 weeks from the release of the EPA guidelines to the submission date. You cannot do community engagement in 6 weeks. At least anything significant enough to make as Colette mentioned earlier, to make the project real. You need to start that early. You need to do it early and often. And that will fill in, if you look at a grant application guidelines and requirements, that fills in a lot of the blanks for that application. So that's something you need to start early. If you can do any other planning activities such as visioning, work with the community, come up with an assets and needs study if you have funding available to you. If you don't have that funding, there's things that you can do, like I said, that would comprise what they consider planning work. So that is engaging the public, looking at what your master plan says. Are there redevelopment plans in the area? What does that mean to your focus area or your particular brownfields? All that information can be gathered up and put together. And you can also utilize the guidelines from the previous solicitation year. They don't change, they haven't changed drastically in about 5 years, where they did a complete overhaul. So, like I said, every year they kind of tweak them. Are you in an OZ? Are you in a floodplain? Those are minor things to address in a application. So you can basically put the bulk of your application together and then wait for those guidelines to come out, then tweak it, have us review it, and then submit it. That's the best way to go about this.
Let me just also add a couple of things. We can show you successful applications from years past, so you can see,
Right.
how others have put together their applications. We strongly suggest that in your application you are telling a story, and think of the people who are reviewing this application. They are reviewing dozens or hundreds of applications. Yours needs to stand out. So you need to tell the story about how desperate you are for this money, that how great a need there is, and with this money, the wonderful things that can be done for your community. So again, we can show you applications from years past that have been successful, that you can read through and use as a guide. I also wanted to mention, when we're talking about planning, things that you can be doing now, long before you identify where you're getting your funding and where you're going to apply for that funding. 2 things that we usually suggest communities to do is, one, create a brownfields task force in your town. This should not be the concern of just one person, your economic development official or your planning official. This is a community concern. So a brownfields task force, typical members would be maybe your elected officials, maybe your economic development folks, your engineering staff, your health department. That's really critical because, as Sean said, health data is needed for some applications. So it's great to have them on board. Your police and fire. A lot of these brownfield sites have illegal or unwanted activity on them. A lot of them have fires for one reason or another. So your public safety folks know these sites. So get them on your task force. Your Chamber of Commerce is a good person to be on the task force, and others. When you bring that group together, that's what I was mentioning about partnerships and identifying stakeholders. All of these people bring great resources to the table as you advance your planning. Another thing that we strongly recommend is, if you're in a community that has more than one brownfield site, and most of our communities do, create a brownfields inventory. Identify those brownfield sites. Identify where they are within your community. You don't have to go into great detail about each site, but if you can come up with a list of brownfield sites and whatever publicly available information is out there about each site. That gives you a lot more information as you do a lot of things, as you identify what funding you need, as you apply for that funding, as you try to market sites for redevelopment, and it's the beginning of creating a wealth of knowledge about these sites. So we strongly recommend that you do that. And all the things that we're saying, all the things that we're suggesting you do, we can provide you assistance along the way. So, again, call us at any time, email us at any time, even if you don't know what kind of assistance you need, we'll talk you through it, and then we'll suggest ways that we can help you.
Yeah, it sounds like that inventory is a really good first planning start, because it'll also, you can then prioritize and then start to think of the reasons as to why you're prioritizing that. And you can, in the application, say, we've got X number of sites. This is our biggest priority. Here's why. So yeah, I think that's really good for towns to think through.
And
it gives you it gives you a compelling application. And the saying is always, ordinary doesn't get funded. So you really need to have that. I mean, and it's very hard for people to write an application where you're showing your community in the most impoverished light possible, but you have to. And you have to achieve that balance between showing it in that impoverished light, but telling them, look at the terrific things we're going to do with this grant money, and we had the ability to do it.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky balance, and we can help you with that, because there's a lot more information even beyond what Colette mentioned that you can gather early to put into that application to be ready to go.
So I've been talking a lot, which I actually don't like to do on these. There's a lot of, names on here. Does anyone else want to jump in? You are welcome to turn your camera on and unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you want to share too. That's what we do a lot. These forums are to exchange information. So if you've gone through this process and you have any advice, we also welcome that.
there is a question in the chat. It says, doesn't the DEP have a listing of all New Jersey brownfields? No. I'll tell you what they have. So New Jersey has a listing of all known contaminated sites. But if you remember, one of the first things that I said was not all contaminated sites are brownfields. In New Jersey, in DEP's listing of known contaminated sites, there are properties that are still operational. It's just there was a leaky, underground storage tank, and that's why they made the list, or some kind of spill happened, and that's why they made the list. Does not necessarily mean they're brownfields. Conversely, there are a lot of brownfields out there where contamination is not known, so they would not have made an appearance on DEP's list of contaminated properties. So no, there is no one comprehensive list of brownfield sites in New Jersey. That's what, but you would, if you're going to create an inventory of your brownfield sites, you would look at New Jersey DEP's list of known contaminated sites as a starting point to see if there's any sites in your community and if they fit the definition of brownfields.
Colette, does the old brownfields inventory still exist, which is voluntary, and people put their properties in there, or was put in there voluntarily from a marketing perspective? Is that still around?
SiteMart, I think is.
Yeah,
what you're
SiteMart. That's
referring
it.
to.
Yeah.
SiteMart is still up. You can still look at SiteMart. I could not tell you if it is updated regularly. I don't know. But if you Google it, you'll see SiteMart and you'll see properties. I just don't know how current that might be.
Anybody else? Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Pamela.
Okay, we would like to take a known contaminated site, and our village would like to purchase it and make it into a park. But from a prior webinar that I attended, it said, you're not going to do this in a straight trajectory. There are all kinds of twists and turns, and you have to be flexible and be ready to pivot in terms of your ultimate goal. So whereas we would like a park now, we might have to redevelop it as, say, assisted living. But how do you do that if you buy the property with Green Acres funding? Because you later can't undo that.
Right.
You can, but it's very hard because you have to replace it with 3 times as much and you got to go through a whole
That's
thing. You
right.
don't want to do that.
And we're doing it now, and it's painful.
I'm not sure why would you be purchasing the site for the ultimate end use to be a park, but put something else there in the interim?
Not in the interim. No, it's just that, like, what if we run out of money? What if we have to bring in a developer?
Oh. So
And in
you-
fact, I'm getting a lot of pushback from our Chamber of Commerce and groups that I would like as partners, and they're saying, build something that generates tax revenue.
So you can't use
gotta
Green
park
Acres
2
funds.
blocks away, you
Yeah.
know?
You have to make that decision now. If you use those Green Acres funds,
Yeah.
it's encumbered and it's very, 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 very hard to get out of it. So I think
Yeah.
you have to make that choice now. If you're doing Green Acres, it's public space. If
Okay.
you're, find other funds to buy it if you think you don't want it to be public space.
Mhm.
Sadly, that's the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
I was just
Come
going to
on,
chime
there's
in a
got to
little
be
bit.
classes. Oh, go ahead, Mary Kay.
Just for Pamela, too, I think it's important that you guys get a handle on the type of contamination that's present on the property, because that will affect your end use. The ability or how much it's going to cost to clean up to make it into parkland versus the type of contamination if you could leave it in place and develop into something commercial. There's a huge difference in money there, cleaning it up for a park versus cleaning it up for commercial. So I
Right.
think the more knowledge you have on the type of contamination present on that property would help you make a better decision.
So far, it looks like benzene.
Okay.
Yeah.
In soil and groundwater?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
You
I'll
know,
give you a
Mary-
little good news. It degrades naturally really, really well. It's not your worst chemical to find, but
Oh, good. I didn't know that. All
okay.
right.
You know what, Mary Kay, you mentioned something, and maybe we can expand upon this a little, because this is really important. Not all sites can be cleaned up to the highest standards that DEP has. And your ability to clean up a site will determine what you can ultimately put on that site. So, for instance, if you want to put housing on a particular piece of property, the cleanup standards are much higher than if you wanted to put a warehouse on that property, or if you wanted to put open space on that property. So things like residential or a daycare center, very high standards of cleanup. Something like a warehouse where you are essentially capping the property and any contaminants that remain, much lower standards. So before you come up with before you actually start cleaning up the property, you should know what the end use is going to be, so you know what kind of standards that cleanup has to be. Mary Kay, is that correct? Anything you want to add to that?
You did a great job. No,
Oh,
that's
thanks.
exactly, yeah, that's exactly correct, Colette. Basically knowing your end use is kind of where are we going with this property? Can we leave that contaminated soil in place and redevelopment, or do we have to expend funds to excavate and remove it off site so it doesn't exist anymore? More of a park daycare type situation versus leaving it in place, putting shopping, parking lots, things like that. So there's lots involved, but it's all you can actually kind of, once you have, the idea of the magnitude of that contaminant in soil, you can kind of estimate, what's it going to cost and how big of a problem is this?
So when we talk about the Brownfields redevelopment process, we give an overview that is very linear, and we tend to talk about redevelopment as the last phase. But in fact, you really need to think about the redevelopment very early in the planning phase for reasons that, such as what Mary Kay said, but also the funding reasons that Sean brought up. So don't leave your thinking about redevelopment to the very last, because that's things that you did beforehand are really going to impact what your ability to redevelop as. So think about it up front.
Anybody else have any questions? Like quiet group, there's a whole bunch of them there. I see all those names. Is there anything else you guys want to share before we let loose that you think, you know, you were hoping somebody would ask and you could dig in on a little bit?
I don't know, Sean, Mary Kay, anything we want to go into more detail about?
You don't have to, just.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, we usually, all of these topics, we usually go into far more detail when we do our learning lab, which again, we're inviting you all to attend, the one that's being sponsored by the Highlands. But I think we touched on
Everything.
at least a little bit of each topic. But again, just encourage you, any questions you have, feel free to reach out to us. If you are a nonprofit or a public entity, our assistance is free of charge. Contact us anytime, even if you don't know what you need from us, just let's have a conversation and we can suggest different ways that we can help you. Please keep looking at our website because there'll be announcements there of upcoming events. There's also some, you know, good tools and resources on that website as well. I think
You
Sean,
guys want to throw that in the chat, and also maybe the registration for that Highlands event too in the chat. And with that, I also put in the chat, again, if you appreciate our program, we'd really appreciate your donation in return to support our efforts. And I want to again thank Colette, Sean, and Mary Kay for being here today. And this video will go up in the future for other people to watch, and I'm sure they will be in touch with Colette and Sean if they need assistance. So yep, Colette just put it in the chat, njit.edu/NJ Brownfields. So with
yeah,
that,
if you
go
go
ahead, Colette.
into our website, you'll see the registration for the Highlands
Highlands.
event. You could
Great.
just click on the
Yeah, if you go under news and events, it's listed there. And
Wonderful.
as well as the link.
Great. So thank you again, and I am going to go ahead and stop recording.